As you may have noticed, after almost every fight, Tim would either address his father directly or ask people not to see him merely as his father's son, but as his own person. Seems that success went to Tim's head, and around that time the level of his opposition started to rise. The young Tim began taking fights he wasn't ready for. There's any group of fighters who match the mental toughness of those from the post-Viet region, it's the Mexicans. And it was in that moment that Tim Tszyu began facing the very problems his father had warned him about. His first fight against Sebastian Fondora started like a typical Tim bout. He came out aggressive, attacking the body and looking to close the distance early. But everything changed in the second round when a freak elbow from Fondora split open Tszyu's forehead. Blood began to pour into his eyes. From that point forward, Tszyu was essentially fighting blind. He kept pressing forward, but his accuracy dropped and his defense suffered. Fondora took full advantage, using his jab to control the distance and keeping Tszyu at bay. Despite the injury, Tim showed incredible heart and made it to the final bell. The judges awarded Fondora a split decision victory. It was Tszyu's first career loss, but fans respected his grit and determination. In hindsight, that elbow may have been the worst thing to happen to Tszyu's career. Not because of the loss, but because it created a false image of who he was and what professional boxing truly is. Tim thought that fighting through blood and making it to the final bell in hopes of winning was the peak of a boxer's endurance, when in reality that's the bare minimum expected from a top-level fighter. These things aren't something to brag about or build your confidence on. But young Tim, who had lived his entire life in comfort, believed this was the pinnacle of toughness and confidence in the boxing world. This is why his father hadn't warned him for nothing. Avoiding post-Soviet fighters wasn't about fear. It was about understanding the difference between thinking you're tough and actually being tough. Of course, Tim is tougher than the average man, but at the elite level, toughness is something else entirely. It's about staying calm while rocked, thinking clearly when your stamina is gone, and maintaining technique under pressure. True champions don't just survive in chaos. They don't suck dick on the sidelines. They adapt and strive to win. That's the difference between good fighters and elite ones. And that's what his father tried to explain. Tim grew up in comfort in Australia, where hardship meant something very different from those who came up in poverty or war. While Tim fights to prove he's not just Costa's son, his opponents fight to survive, to lift their families out of misery. That's exactly who Tim faced next. A man who buried the career of a promising young fighter. Bakram Murtsalv, a Chechen with no media hype, was the exact type of fighter Tim's father warned him about. Elite amateur, undefeated as a pro, quiet but dangerous. He might look like a nobody, but these are the types of fighters who break opponents for good. And that's what happened to Tim. Both men started cautiously sizing each other up. Jay tried to establish the center of the ring with his jab, while Murtsalv stayed patient, waiting for moments to counter with power. The first round was competitive, but by the end it was clear that Murtsalv had better timing and distance control. In the second round, Murtsalv turned up the pressure. He began landing clean left straights and hooks over Tszyu's guard. The first knockdown came from a sharp shot to the chin and drop steps through. Tszyu got up quickly. Half a minute later, he was dropped again by a left uppercut. In the clinch, still a lovely leg. The third knockdown came near the end of the round. A left hook over the top. I do not know how he's still standing. Down. Tszyu stood up again, but was clearly shaken and unsteady. The referee allowed him to continue, and the round ended with Morta swarming. Despite being hurt, Tszyu came out for round 3, but he looked confused and overwhelmed. Murtsalv Didn't waste time. Still pressuring, but he's not got with that left hook. He resumed the attack with crisp lefts and hooks. Eventually a perfectly timed counter landed, dropping Tszyu for the fourth time. His corner had seen enough and threw in the towel to protect their fighter from further damage. Mordisalv was declared the winner by third round TKO, successfully defending his IBF title. Tszyu looked emotionally crushed. In the post-fight interview, he admitted he was shocked by how quickly the fight spiraled out of control. Many fans and analysts agree this was a brutal wake-up call, a true fraud check, and a reminder of what his father had warned: never fight a post-Viet warrior unless you're absolutely ready. If you closely analyze the events of the fight, it becomes clear that Tim's actions weren't about adapting or looking for ways to win. They were about proving he hadn't given up yet and was still willing to fight on. He naively rushed to get up after knockdowns, not even considering that he had the option to take his time, catch his breath, and think about how to approach the rest of the fight. Instead of adjusting his tactics, he just rushed back into the fire. This is exactly what his father warned him about. Tim was fighting to prove he was just as good as his father. His opponent was fighting to survive regardless of what the world thought of him. But as a young fighter, Tim didn't fully learn the lesson. He went on to arrange a rematch with Fonda, a fight where he was knocked down in the very first round, and the bout was stopped in the seventh. That rematch answered all the lingering questions. The cut in their first fight wasn't an obstacle that cost him victory. It was a life raft that preserved his reputation. Tim Tszyu once had a 20-win streak and was seen as one of the top prospects in the boxing world. But in just 3 fights, his career has been virtually derailed.